Part 1. Introduction and Difficult Childhood. Louis Vuitton's story is not just a tale of fashion. It is a profound journey from hardship to heritage. Born in a modest French village, Louis entered the world under the weight of poverty and adversity. His childhood home, constructed from rough wooden planks with a leaking roof and freezing, damp floors, echoed daily with the struggles of a family barely scraping by. His father, Xavier Vuitton, worked tirelessly as a carpenter, crafting furniture and repairing small wood structures. His mother, Corinne Gallard, earned what little she could by sewing hats for women in the village. Together they toiled endlessly, but comfort remained a distant, almost unreachable dream. From a very early age, Louis learned that life was unkind to the poor. He lacked the basic joys and comforts that other children seemed to take for granted. Um, there were no toys to play with, no structured education, and no warm meals every evening. While other children chased each other across fields or gathered in cozy classrooms, Louis spent his days laboring beside his father. He carried heavy planks of wood, hammered nails with blistered hands, and swept sawdust from the workshop floor. His tiny hands grew callous. His back knew fatigue long before it knew rest. These formative years forged in him a resilience and quiet strength that would one day define his legacy. Despite these harsh realities, Louis was not without curiosity or hope. His heart stirred every time travelers passed through the village. Men and women of means, dressed in elegant clothes and riding in fine carriages, often carried large, beautiful trunks, polished and adorned with intricate designs. Louis would pause from his chores to observe them with wide eyes. Where were they going? What did the world beyond this small village look like? Who made those magnificent tropes? These questions ignited a fire in him, a longing not only for escape but for transformation. He began to nurture a silent dream, one that reached far beyond the snow-covered rooftops and the bitter wind that often swept through his cold, dimly lit home. Then came the tragedy that would test his spirit more than anything before. Louis lost his mother while he was still a boy. The village had no doctors, no medicine, and no way to save her from the illness that slowly consumed her. Her death shattered their fragile home. Louis stood by her grave in silence, too shocked to cry, too young to understand the full weight of the loss, but old enough to feel it press against his heart. After her passing, his father, once a hard-working and affectionate man, fell into despair. He became distant, emotionally detached, and unable to care for Louis as he once had. For the first time in his life, Louis felt truly and completely alone. But in that aching silence, amidst the weight of sorrow and abandonment, Louis made a choice. He would not let this be the end of his story. He would not remain in the village where memories only brought pain. He would leave it. He would chase that distant vision, vague but radiant, of a different life, a greater destiny. Part 2, The Hard Journey to Paris. Louis did not leave his village with a plan, only with purpose. He had no map, no shoes fit for the road, and not a single coin in his pocket. What he carried was an intangible, an unbreakable will. At just 13 years old, he stepped away from everything he had ever known. The sun had not yet risen when he slipped away, his only luggage a small bag slung over his back, stuffed with meager belongings and silent determination. The road to Paris was not paved in gold. It stretched nearly 500 kilometers, through forests, over hills, across rivers, and into the unknown. There was no carriage waiting to carry him, no kind hand to guide him. His legs were his only means of travel, and hunger, fatigue, and weather were his constant companions. The first days were grueling. The countryside was merciless, offering little shelter and even less mercy. Rain poured without warning, soaking his clothes and chilling his bones. At night, he found shelter beneath trees or in abandoned sheds. He used his bag as a pillow, the stars as his ceiling, and his dreams as the only warmth he could rely on. His feet became blistered and sore. At times, he could barely take another step, but he always did. He relied on small acts of kindness, an old farmer offering bread, a villager giving water from a well, or a stranger pointing him in the right direction. In return, Louis offered labor. He cleaned stables, helped on farms, fetched wood, and accepted whatever meal he was offered. Pride had no place in survival. Louis understood this. He was not above any work as long as it helped him get closer to his goal. There were days when he ate nothing, nights when the cold gnawed at his skin, moments when he cried silently into the soil beneath him, wondering if he would ever make it. But there was something louder than his doubt, the voice inside him that refused to let him turn back. The dream of a different life, a life built by his own hands, kept him walking. The journey took not days or weeks, but years. It became a rite of passage, transforming the boy from the mountains into a survivor forged by hardship. Each town he passed, each mile he conquered, brought him closer to a place he had only imagined: Paris, the city of light, the city of possibilities. When he finally reached the edge of Paris, he was no longer the same boy who had left the village. His body was thinner, his clothes worn to threads, and his eyes carried the weight of someone far older. Yet, despite the exhaustion, his spirit had never burned brighter. Before him stretched a city alive with movement and opportunity, yet it stood indifferent to the boy at its gate. Paris was grand, but also unkind to those who arrived with nothing. Louis is now one of thousands, hungry, homeless, invisible. And yet he had arrived. Against all odds, with nothing but hope and resolve, he had made it to Paris. Part 3, Harsh Reality in Paris and a Turning Point. Glorious, grand, and bursting with promise. But for Louis Vuitton, who arrived with nothing but a dream and worn-out shoes, the city of light was also a city of cold stone and closed doors. The grandeur he once imagined was now in front of him, yet he stood at the edge of it all, hungry, ragged, and alone. The streets were alive with music, markets, and the scent of freshly baked bread, but none of it belonged to him. Paris was magnificent for the wealthy and merciless for the forgotten. Louis had no roof over his head. He wandered from district to district, knocking on doors and asking for work. Workshop to workshop turned him away. The rejections were polite at best and cruel at worst. No references, no experience, no room for you. Each night he slept where he could, in abandoned carts, under archways, or beneath awnings outside shuttered bakeries. The cobblestones were unforgiving, the winter air like knives on his skin. And sometimes he fell asleep listening to the clatter of horses and the voices of passers-by, wondering if he would ever truly belong in this city. Hunger gnawed at him daily. On good days, he found leftover crusts near the market or received scraps from sympathetic vendors. On bad days, he drank water to quiet his stomach and wrapped himself tighter against the cold, waiting for morning to come. But even in that darkness, Louis held on. He refused to give up. And then fate intervened. One afternoon, as he wandered past a cluster of workshops, Louis saw a man struggling to carry a large wooden trunk through a shop door. Without hesitation, he rushed over and grabbed the other end. Together, they heaped it inside. The shop was unlike anything Louis had ever seen. Trunks of all shapes and sizes lined the walls, crafted from rich wood wrapped in fine leather and adorned with brass corners and polished locks. The scent of glue, cedar, and freshly oiled leather filled the air. It was, to Louis, a cathedral of craftsmanship. The shop owner, a stern man named Monsieur Maréchal, looked up and watched the boy with sharp, assessing eyes. "You're strong for your size. What's your name?" "Louis Vuitton, sir," he answered. "What do you want?" "I want to work." Maréchal raised an eyebrow. "Can you make trucks?" "Not yet," Louis admitted. "But I can learn. I'll do anything." "Everyone says that," the man replied, half amused. "Feel bene." Louis stepped forward, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Please, give me a chance." There was a pause, a long one, then finally a nod. "You start tomorrow and no pay. You clean, you observe, you work. If you prove yourself, we'll see." Louis bowed his head in gratitude. For the first time in Paris, someone had said yes. It wasn't a job, not yet, but it was a door, and Louis had just stepped through it. Part 4, the celebration parade. Louis began his new life at the workshop before dawn, long before the city stirred awake. The building was still, quiet except for the creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. He was handed a broom and a bucket, and his first tasks were as humble as they came: sweep the floors, organize tools, polish brass fittings, and dispose of sawdust. But Louis didn't complain, not once. He observed everything, every movement of the craftsmen, how they carved wood, bent it without breaking, treated leather, stitched seams, and sealed joints. He noted that how each trunk was designed to serve not just as a container, but as a companion for journeys. These one boxes, they were mobile wardrobes, treasures with handles. After the others left for the evening, Louis stayed. He practiced on discarded materials, imitating what he had seen. His first attempts were clumsy, splintered edges, crooked stitches, but he persisted. He wasn't trying to impress anyone yet. He was building something inside himself, skill. One morning, Monsieur Marchal noticed a small wooden panel tucked behind a bench. It bore a crude attempt at joining and an uneven curve, but the effort was unmistakable. "Did you make this?" he asked without looking up. Louis nodded, unsure if the punishment was coming. The Marechal said nothing more that day, but that evening he lingered. "You'll stay after hours," he said gruffly. "I'll teach you. Just don't waste my time." From that point on, Louis became more than a floor sweeper. He was an apprentice. Under Marechal's instruction, Louis learned the full language of trunk making. He learned to measure with precision, down to the millimeter. He learned which woods to choose for strength and lightness: poplar, beech, and oak. He learned to cut and bend panels, treat leather with oils, sew tough fabrics by hand, and attach hardware so perfectly aligned it looked like jewelry. He didn't just want to make trunks. He wanted to make the best. Months turned to years. Louis's work became increasingly refined. He stopped mimicking and started inventing. He suggested slight design changes. He recommended new finishing touches. The craftsman, once indifferent to the quiet boy, began to nod in respect. Clients started asking for him by name. "His precise," one said. "That boy handles leather like a master," said another. Nercatuan, though, could not deny the truth. Louis was no longer a helper, he was an artisan. A quiet, tireless, fiercely determined artisan. But his true breakthrough was still to come, because one day Rodeo would walk through the door. Part 5, The Empress and a Revolutionary Trunk Design. It began like any other morning. The workshop hummed with the usual rhythm: mallets tapping, leather creaking under the pull of tight stitches, shavings curling off wooden panels. But then the door opened and everything changed. She entered, not with fanfare, but with presence. Draped in a flowing silk gown adorned with pearls and subtle diamonds, the woman who stepped into the shop was none other than Empress Eugenie, wife of Napoleon III. Her name echoed through French society. Her style was emulated across. An ounce of this in Marechal's modest atelier. Her sharp eyes scanning the walls lined with trunks. Louis, wiping glue from his hands, froze mid-step. The Empress did not waste words. She turned to the shop owner with the cool confidence of someone used to command. "I need a new trunk," she said. "The ones I have are too heavy, too old-fashioned. I need something fit for modern travel. Something elegant, yet practical." Louis listened, barely breathing. Marchal hesitated. "Your Majesty, we have the finest leather-bound trunks." "No," she interrupted. "I want something new. Something no one else has." Her gaze moved past Marechal and laid it on Louis. "You," she said. "Are you the one they call Vuitton?" Louis stepped forward, heart thudding. "Yes, Your Majesty." She studied him for a moment. This young man in a dust-covered apron, his hands stained with varnish and effort. "Designed me something that has never been seen," she said. "Like, beautiful, functional, impressed me." And just like that, the challenge of a lifetime had been placed before him. Louis spent the next night in a trance of creation. He stayed long after others left, surrounded by sketches, fabrics, and prototype. He recalled all the travelers he had seen pass through his village, how they struggled with bulky, rounded trunks that couldn't be stacked, how rain would seep through leather coverings, how porters cursed their awkward weight. He envisioned a flat-topped trunk, a radical departure from the dome-lid designs of the past. It would be covered not in leather, but in waterproof canvas, a material both lighter and more durable. The interior would be spacious, yet cleverly partitioned. The hardware would be sturdy, polished, and subtly elegant. It would be a trunk designed not just for transport, but for movement. Every detail mattered: the thickness of the wood, the angle of the edges.
The resistance they block. His hands were blistered by day 3. His eyes are red by day 5. But his spirit never waned. At last, the trunk was finished.
The canvas shimmered under the workshop lamps, simple but refined. The brass locks caught the light with a quiet authority. The craftsmanship was flawless. When Louis presented it to the Empress, she ran her hand across the surface slowly, inspecting every angle. She opened the lid, tested the hinges, and lifted it herself. Then she looked at Louis and said only one word: extraordinary. With that, she turned to Marischal. From now on, this young man will be my personal train maker. That single sentence changed Louis's life forever. His name traveled faster than any carriage ever could. Nobles, aristocrats, and wealthy travelers lined up for one of Vuitton's revolutionary trunks. What had once been the dream of a boy in a wooden cottage was now the desire of the elite. But Louis was not done yet. He was just getting started. Part 6, breaking away and building his own brand. For all his rising fame, Louis remained an employee. The trunks bore his hands, but not his name. He worked under Marischal's roof, with Marischal's tools and for Marischal's clientele. Yet each time a wealthy customer requested the young craftsman, they weren't asking for the shop, they were asking for Vuitton. Louis felt it in his bones. It was time to step out of the shadow. The Empress had chosen him. Nobility trusted him. His vision had outgrown the walls of the workshop. And so, with cautious courage, he made a decision that few dared in his position. He would leave. He would build something of his own. He took with him not materials or clients, but something far more valuable: his reputation. Why that and a modest amount of savings, barely enough to rent a narrow storefront in Paris, purchase a basic workbench, and secure a few tools? There were no assistants, no investors, no safety net. He carved a wooden sign by hand and hung it outside. Louis Vuitton, Malatier, trunk maker. The name was now public. The dream was now real. In those early days, every trunk was made entirely by him. He sawed the wood, stitched the canvas, polished the brass, and hammered every nail. He rose before dawn, worked past midnight, skipped meals, and ignored fatigue. His workshop became his world. But fate had one more test. War broke out. The streets of Paris turned to chaos. Straps closed. The rich fled to the countryside. Demand for luxury collapsed overnight. For a time, Louis' shop stood silent. The once bussy workbench gathered dust. He sold tools just to buy food. Days passed without orders. There were whispers that Vuitton's dream was dying before it had truly begun. But Louis did not fold. He adapted. He cut costs, repaired old trunks to survive, focused on quality over quantity, and most importantly, he endured. When peace finally returned, so did opportunity. The wealthy returned, eager to travel again. They no longer wanted the old leather domes of the past. They wanted modern, functional elegance. And they remembered the name that had once impressed a queen. Orders flooded in. Louis's once quiet shop buzzed with activity. He hired apprentices, trained dwarfers, expanded into a larger space. His trunks traveled farther than he ever had, crossing oceans, deserts, and continents. Each carried a mark of quality. Each bore the name Louis Vuitton. He was no longer just a craftsman. He was a brand. Part 7, expansion, family, and the philosophy of luxury. With the war behind them and the world rediscovering its hunger for elegance, Louis Vuitton found himself at a turning point, not of survival, but of expansion. His trunks were no longer merely travel accessories. They were symbols of class and of craftsmanship, a discernment, and the name Louis Vuitton, once whispered in admiration by a few, now carried weight across the city's elite circle. To keep up with the demand, Louis opened a new and larger workshop in Aisne-sur-Seine, just outside of Paris. It was more than a factory, it was a creative sanctuary flooded with natural light and filled with a scent of lacquer and leather. Every inch of it reflected his pursuit of perfection. It became the heart of his operation and remains a sacred space for the brand to this day. But Louis did not chase growth recklessly. He believed in growing deep before growing wide. He selected only a few apprentices, training each one personally. He taught them not just the steps of trunk making, but the soul of it, the patience required to align a seam, the pride in choosing materials, and the silent discipline of removing anything unnecessary. A Vuitton trunk wasn't made to impress at first glance. It was made to endure, to accompany a lifetime of journeys. It was during these years that Louis also built something else, a family. He married Clémence Amélie Pariot, a supportive and intelligent woman who believed in his dream with unwavering conviction. Their union was strong, and soon they welcomed a son, Georges Premier Pont. Louis wasn't just building a business anymore. He was building a legacy. As his name grew beyond France, Louis became more selective. He raised prices. He limited production. He refused mass demand. To him, luxury was not meant for everyone. It was defined by exclusivity. He once said, in so many words, the more people have something, the less valuable it becomes. He understood something that many businesses still fail to grasp. Luxury isn't just about quality, it's about rarity. Louis passed that philosophy on to Georges like a sacred torch. From a young age, Georges worked alongside his father, absorbing his values. Louis taught him more than techniques. He taught him judgment, the difference between ordinary and exceptional, the invisible line between fine and perfect. As the business matured, so did Georges. And Louis knew the future of the brand was in good hands. The trunks were still evolving, becoming lighter, smarter, more customizable. Louis introduced compartments for jewelry, cosmetics, suits, and gowns. He created special order pieces for opera singers, explorers, and royalty. And yet, he never lost sight of his core idea: form must serve function, and beauty must be built to last. By the time he grew older, Louis Vuitton was more than a name on a shop sign. It was a standard, a symbol of devotion to craft, a rebellion against the disposable, a quiet, unshakable belief that true excellence is not fast, it is forged. Part 8, George Vuitton and the Birth of the Monogram. When Louis passed the torch to George, he wasn't just handing over a business. He was entrusting a philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of making, and most importantly, a way of being. Georges, sharp-minded and ambitious, had grown up watching his father obsess over every hinge and stitch, but he also recognized the world was changing. The aristocrats were no longer the only ones traveling. Industrialization had brought with it new markets, new technologies, and new threats. One of those threats came not from competition, but from imitation. Louis Vuitton's reputation had become so prestigious that others began copying his designs. Fake trucks, adorned with similar patterns and false craftsmanship, began to flood the market. Customers couldn't always tell the difference until it was too late. Georges knew that if they were to preserve what his father had built, he had to act, not by hiding or retreating, but by creating something that no one could copy without being exposed immediately. His solution would become iconic. In the late 19th century, Georges introduced a design that would change fashion history, the LV monogram canvas. It featured the initials LV interwoven with floral patterns, quatrefoils, and stars, drawn from both Japanese motifs and French design traditions. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a shield. a visual declaration of identity. From that moment forward, any attempt to fake a Louis Vuitton trunk would be obvious. The monogram did more than protect, it elevated, gave customers something to take pride in. It made each piece instantly recognizable, not just as luggage, but as a statement. But George didn't stop there. He diversified the collection, no longer just making travel trunks. The brand began producing handbags, steamer bags, and portable wardrobes. Each piece was built to serve a purpose, yet styled with the same attention to elegance and durability that had defined the brand from the start. The world embraced it. Royal families, opera singers, explorers heading to Africa, business tycoons crossing the Atlantic, they all carried Vuitton. Georges also understood the power of innovation. He added new features, brass locks with unique mechanisms, compartments tailored to personal needs, and reinforced corners that withstood long voyages. Every improvement made the trunks not just more luxurious, but more intelligent. Under George's leadership, Louis Vuitton became more than a name whispered among the French elite. It became global, but he never strayed from the values his father had instilled. Quality first, precision always, elegance without exception, and above all, exclusivity. Georges believed, as Louis had, that not everyone should own a Vuitton. It should belong only to those who understood it, who appreciated craftsmanship, not just brand. And with that principle, Georges secured the brand's next great chapter. And just defend the legacy, he amplified it. Part 9, War, Crisis, and a Hidden Chapter. As the 20th century unfolded, so too did a series of crises that would shake the world to its core. Economic collapses, revolutions, and 2 devastating world wars reshaped nations, and with them industries. For Louis Vuitton, now under the stewardship of George and later his son Gaston Louis Vuitton, these events tested more than business strategies. They tested the soul of the brand. During the First World War, international travel came to a near standstill. Trunks, once the prized possessions of explorers and diplomats, were suddenly unnecessary luxuries. Factories slowed, orders stopped, resources vanished. Still, the Vuitton family refused to lower their standards or abandon their commitment to quality. Instead, they focused on adapting. They introduced smaller, more functional items, handbags, portable writing desks, and small leather goods, items that could still sell in times of uncertainty, but that retained the mark of luxury. These weren't concessions. They were strategic evolutions. Then came the Second World War. This was different. France was invaded. Paris was occupied. And under German control, every business had a choice: close, collaborate, or survive however possible. What followed is a chapter in the Louis Vuitton story that remained hidden for decades. During occupation, the Vuitton family made difficult, controversial decisions. Documents would later reveal that the company cooperated with the Vichy government, producing goods for officials aligned with the Nazi regime. Some family members were known to have ties to powerful collaborators. It's a part of the brand's legacy that the company did not publicly address until many years later. Why did they do it? Was it out of survival, opportunism, a complex mixture of both? We may never know every detail. What's certain is that Louis Vuitton survived at a cost. When the war ended, France was left scarred economically, emotionally, morally, and so was the brand. But Gaston Louis Vuitton knew that rebuilding the business meant more than reopening workshops. It meant restoring trust. He returned the focus to what his grandfather had taught them: authenticity, excellence, and restraint. In the post-war years, as Europe began to breathe again, Louis Vuitton introduced new product lines and returned to global expansion. But the family kept a low profile. They built, but carefully. They are crafted, but without spectacle. They let their work speak. And slowly customers returned, not just because of nostalgia, but because of substance. Because no matter how dark the chapter had been, the craft had not changed. The stitches were still even. The truck still opened with satisfying precision. The leather still aged like wine. Even in a fractured world, Vuitton still stood for something real. Part 10, Reinvention under Henry Racamier. By the mid-20th century, Louis Vuitton had reclaimed its status, but the world around it was evolving faster than ever before. Air travel was replacing steamships. Global commerce was accelerating. A new generation of consumers was rising, young, mobile, status conscious. To navigate this changing landscape, the brand needed a fresh vision. And that came in the form of an unexpected leader, Henry Racamier. Henry was not a craftsman nor a Vuitton by blood. He was the husband of Odile Vuitton, great-granddaughter of Louis himself. But what he lacked in lineage, he more than made up for in boldness and brilliance. You know, at a time when the business was still operating like a small family-run workshop, Henry saw its hidden potential. He believed Louis Vuitton could be more than a heritage brand. It could become the center of the luxury universe. He gave him a structure. He turned the family business into a modern corporation, streamlining production, distribution, and marketing. He opened new boutiques in key international cities, New York, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Milan, transforming Louis Vuitton from a French icon into a global presence. But Henry didn't just think globally, he thought strategically. He introduced uniform branding across all stores, same architecture, same display, same elevated experience. He made sure that stepping into a Louis Vuitton store in Paris felt the same as stepping into a one in Los Angeles or London. He also refined the pricing strategy. Higher prices, fewer discounts, limited editions. In doing so, he reaffirmed what Louis and George had always known. Luxury is not for everyone. And that's what makes it powerful. You know, still, Henry's greatest move was yet to come. In an era when most fashion houses were struggling to survive independently, he envisioned a new kind of company, one that could unite the most powerful names in luxury under a single banner. He initiated a merger. In the late 1980s, Henry Racamier brought together Louis Vuitton, Moet, and Chandon, France's most prestigious champagne house, and Hennessy, the world's top cognac brand, to form LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet, Hennessy. It was an unprecedented fashion, wine, and spirits under one roof, but it worked. LVMH became the first true luxury conglomerate, a financial and cultural force that would come to dominate the high-end industry. With this merger, Louis Vuitton gained access to deeper capital, broader global networks, and unmatched brand synergy. But more importantly, it signaled something bigger. Louis Vuitton was no longer just a business. Yeah, it was a pillar of a new empire. Yet this empire would soon be tested from within, because with great power comes great ambition. And waiting in the wings was a man who would redefine luxury on a scale no one had dared imagine. Part 11, Bernard Arnault's The of Go Domination. Entered Bernard Arnault, a man whose name would become synonymous with luxury, ambition, and absolute control. When LVMH was still in its formative years, Arnault saw something that others didn't. He wasn't interested in just building a successful company. He envisioned creating the largest and most powerful luxury empire the world had ever seen. At the time, Henry Racamier was still steering the ship, but Arnault, calculating and relentless, began buying shares quietly at first, then in massive amounts. He maneuvered with precision, slowly gaining influence within LVMH's board. Before long, he made his move. In a corporate power play that remains legendary in business history, Arnault ousted Henry Racamier, taking full control of LVMH. Some called it ruthless, others genius. To say it, but either way, a new era had begun. And gradually, Arnault Louis Vuitton didn't just grow, it exploded. He brought in visionary designers. He launched aggressive global expansions. He merged fashion with culture, art, and celebrity. He understood that in the new economy, luxury wasn't just about craftsmanship. It was about aspiration. He turned Louis Vuitton into not just a product, but a dream. Flagship stores open on Fifth Avenue, the Champs-Élysées, Ginza, and Beijing. He commissioned collaborations with artists, sculptors, and even streetwear legends. Louis Vuitton was no longer just a trunk maker. It was a force in pop culture, high art, and fashion innovation. Arnault introducing the runway shows with global media coverage. Limited edition drops that caused lines around the block. Designer appointments like Marc Jacobs, Virgil Abloh, and Nicolas Guesquière, who turned handbags into collectible art. He understood exclusivity better than anyone, but also how to scale it. Even as the brand expanded into hundreds of boutiques worldwide, he maintained control over supply, pricing, and distribution. The result? Louis Vuitton became the most valuable luxury brand on the planet. In LVMH, he had acquired Dior, Fendi, Givenchy, Bulgari, and dozens more. Each brand under Arnault's leadership maintained its identity, but contributed to one vision: dominate every sector of luxury: fashion, jewelry, watches, wines, cosmetics, and hospitality. Today, LVMH is worth hundreds of billions, and Bernard Arnault himself has become one of the richest individuals on earth. Yet, through all this, through global expansion, designer rotations, and media revolutions, one thing remains. The trunk, that simple, elegant, functional box, first imagined by Louis himself, still sits at the core of the brand. Still handmade, still revered, still a symbol of everything Louis Vuitton has stood for since day one: craftsmanship, heritage, and quiet power. And whether in a penthouse in Tokyo or a studio in Paris, when a Louis Vuitton trunk is opened, it whispers the same story. A boy once walked 470 kilometers to chase a dream, and the world followed him. Part 12, Legacy Beyond Luxury. Louis Vuitton is not just a company. It is not merely a fashion label or a maker of fine leather goods. And it is something deeper, something rarer, a living testament to the vision, resilience, and the unshakable belief that greatness can come from the most unlikely of places. It began with a boy who lost his mother, a boy who had no money, no education, no formal training, a boy who walked nearly 500 kilometers with blistered feet and a dream in his heart. He arrived in Paris unknown, slept in carts, starved, and was told no more times than he could count. But he kept going. He swept floors, he stayed late, and learned with his hands and with his eyes. He built not just trains, but trust. When given the smallest opportunity, he created something revolutionary. And with it, he didn't just win the favor of a queen, he created a standard. That spirit has never left the brand. Every generation of the Vuitton family, Georges, Gaston Lully, and every leader since Raquemier Arnault, has understood that they're not just protecting a logo, they're stewards of a legacy. It's why Louis Vuitton refuses to chase trends. It sets up. Why doesn't advertise discounts? It's because luxury has no markdown. Why its artisans still work by hand? Because some things are not meant to be rushed. It's why celebrities don't just wear, they align with it. Because owning Louis Vuitton is more than fashion. It's a signal, a quiet message that says, I choose the best. I know what it means to carry history. In a world of fast fashion and fleeting fame, Louis Vuitton endures. It endures because it is built on something more powerful than marketing or money. It is built on a story. The story of a boy from a cold wooden cottage who refused to accept the life the world offered him, who redefined luggage and luxury, then legacy. A story that says you don't have to start with wealth to build something worthy. You just have to start. This is more than a brand. It is a legacy.